Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth, and fancy seeing you here in June. A very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. And welcome to Monday's edition of the DC Movie and TV Daily. There's not much to report. There's not anything to report today. So I thought we would talk about Batman v Superman, because it's been a bit of a time since we really did a Batman v Superman video on the channel. Now, please, if you have subscribed, that's awesome. But if you haven't, please subscribe. But please make sure you hit the notifications button, because I don't want you missing this work of art. All right, it's not a work of art, but I'm flawed. Look at it this way, because I'm so flawed, it makes you look better looking and like a better person. So really, you should be hitting that notifications button. So the video is called Exposing the Tonal Police. When Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice was reviewed and reacted to by major amounts of the audience, we were told that this film was too dark. This film took itself far too seriously. But who made the rules in Congress or at the Houses of Parliament, right, that all CBMs had to be light and sitcoms? Well, I suppose Iron Man 3 kind of set the benchmark for that. A film that pretty much is a sitcom, but dealing with some interesting, touchy subjects at the time. And really, in a lot of ways, when you saw the trailers of Iron Man 3, it had a very, very terrorism kind of feel to it, didn't it? And I thought the trailers looked really deep and dark, but what we saw was a sitcom. But there are many people, mainly MCU stans, who believe that all CBMs should be light and funny, right? We've seen the reaction to the Joker movie, which is, of course, very, very interesting. But we're talking about Batman v Superman today. And the tonal police were out in force to tell us this movie was bad because it was bad. They didn't have any particular reason for saying it was bad, but the critics were the worst. I'm looking from a critic's point of view, and how you can say this is a badly edited, badly directed, badly written film is an insult to Zack Snyder. It's an insult to David S. Goyer and Chris Terrio, who are absolutely, critically acclaimed writers. So it's amazing here. But they didn't criticize David Goyer. They didn't criticize Chris Terrio. They criticized Zack Snyder, who really had no part in penning the story of this film. The agreement was because Christopher Nolan came in with David S. Goyer for Man of Steel, and David would continue the kind of arc that they started in Man of Steel. But those writers didn't get the blame because they knew they couldn't get away with it. But Zack Snyder's easy to attack. People have been attacking Zack Snyder since Watchmen. Oh, Snyder, terrible director, terrible movie. If you're going to call someone a terrible director, you need to have something to back it up. The truth of the matter is, people don't hate Batman v Superman because of the movie it was. People hate Batman v Superman because of the movie it wasn't. They thought they were coming in to see a kind of Captain America Civil War kind of solo movie, but crossover, all in the same movie. We already knew that Aquaman and The Flash and Wonder Woman were going to play some part in this movie. Now, obviously, Aquaman and The Flash and Cyborg were on the CCTV footage. I thought it was a great way to introduce them. Now, maybe they should have played a bigger part in the role, in the film. I don't know. It would have been fun. But then, maybe, already before this film was seen, they were saying all these characters in this film, isn't that over-squeezing it? That was the accusation. So to avoid that accusation, they did the CCTV footage. Now, I think giving us a kind of hint of the kind of characters we were going to get through the CCTV footage was really interesting. And the way they did it was quite compelling. And it really excited me and many of us for Justice League. Now, in 2017, two films came out. Star Wars The Last Jedi and Justice League. Now, we'll talk about Justice League a little bit, not much, because we've been through that. But in 2016, Batman v Superman came out to a very, very negative reaction from critics. But some of the things that we read on the internet were very interesting. Now, Star Wars The Last Jedi's defenders said that Russian bots had taken over the internet and were purposely negatively commenting on that film. I would say that that is a lie, and I would actually say that bots were actually tweeting negatively about Batman v Superman. Now, we know that Kevin Feige and Disney and Marvel Studios were intimidated by Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice before they saw it. But they seemed to know what the film was going to be about, because Captain America Civil War was pretty much exactly the same film. We saw what Scarlet Witch did at the beginning of the film. Very similar tone of events of what happened in Africa with Superman when those people looked to have been killed by Superman, right? Very, very interesting. And already they were setting this in Civil War about everyone having, all the heroes having to register. That was a different kind of storyline. But still, Superman was a much maligned character in BVS, and so were the Avengers. So the tonal kind of patterns of both films were very, very similar. So while we can it's easy to accuse Civil War of being a very similar movie to Batman v Superman, but Captain America Civil War was lauded by critics, lauded by the mainstream consumer, and that made a lot of money, and more money than a film called Batman v Superman. That shouldn't have happened. But why did it happen? Is it because, like critics and some say, it's a bad movie? No, because I think this is one of the best films I've ever seen. But why wasn't it lauded? I think we can start putting kind of the veil onto a conspiracy theory. And the conspiracy theory is, and this is something I'm alleging, I have no evidence of it, so this is allegedly, right? I think Disney had a lot to do with the negative reviews and the bots commenting about BVS. But no one was doing articles. Scott Mendelson wasn't coming out saying Batman v Superman is a great movie and it's just bots commenting on the film. It's just bots commenting on Rotten Tomatoes and rating it on the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. No one was defending this film, because people don't defend Zack Snyder unless you're a fan of his, like us, right? So you can see a very, very immoral, below-the-belt narrative was being set up for Batman v Superman. This film had to fail. It'd already been decided at Disney. This film couldn't succeed, because if this film succeeded, right, then things would have turned out very, very differently. Because what happened with Justice League, and we're going to talk about Justice League a little bit now, we all kind of sit here blaming Kevin Sugihara and Jeff Johns. We put villain hats on everyone at Warner Brothers. But they shouldn't be the ones wearing the villain hats. They only reacted to what started with the reaction of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. And how did this reaction start? Why did it start? Why did a film with some of the best choreography, directing, special effects and acting and writing get done? Why was it reviewed so badly? I saw Batman v Superman, I saw it a lot before many people did. And I actually thought I was seeing another Dark Knight here. I thought critics were going to raise this film. I thought this film was going to make record-breaking box office. The openings was very impressive, but the repeat viewings that we wanted and expected from the mainstream audience didn't happen, because it wasn't what they expected. Now, part of that is the fault of the marketing at WB. They tried to hide what this film was, either because of spoilers or they weren't confident about the film playing well with the mainstream audience and the critics and the word of mouth. And of course, they were right in the context of what they predicted, but they were wrong. Because I believe, just like I've said this before, Logan was marketed exactly what it was. Batman v Superman wasn't. So when people didn't get the movie they expected and maybe wanted, there was a big problem. But you can't discount a conspiracy here of people, critics being negative about this film. The DCU versus the MCU really took effect during this movie, where bots were saying that Civil War was the movie that Batman v Superman should have been. I don't agree with that. I don't think Civil War is a very good movie. Not only is it a rip-off, an absolute rip-off of Batman v Superman, of course, a little bit marvelised with the gags and stuff. I also think this film has the worst villain I've ever seen. And basically, this guy is doing exactly what Lex Luthor is doing in Batman v Superman. But apparently, Jesse Eisenberg is a bad actor, a bad Lex Luthor, but the guy playing the villain, but even the critics didn't like the villain in Civil War, but they still said it was a really good film. What covered a lot of the flaws of Civil War was the introduction of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. This is Spider-Man. People were excited. He was in the MCU. This was massive. This is what we've been waiting for years. It was a dream thing, wasn't it, to have Spider-Man? And what a great introduction. It's kind of interesting with him leaving the MCU now. We can look back at it and say that was the best moment of Tom Holland's Spider-Man in Civil War. It was a great introduction. It was like the comics. He was a kid. He'd never heard of the Empire Strikes. Look, it was great. That was the best moment of the film. So that covers up a lot of the inaccuracies and the flaws of that film. So people call it a great film because of that moment. That film has nothing more. There's interesting moments between Captain America and Iron Man. I like those elements. And Robert Downey Jr., of course, and Chris Evans are great actors. So again, they covered up for the film's flaws. So all of a sudden, you've got a really successful Civil War movie that literally is copying Batman v Superman, and the hatred on the internet for Batman v Superman was very big. None of us who loved the film can deny it. And I think many of us felt alone and felt like we were one of the few people who liked the film. Now with the release of the Snyder Cut campaign, we know there's so many of us around the world. Otherwise, the movement wouldn't have made so many waves within the industry and within the media, mainstream media writing about this movement, right? So what I'll say about Batman v Superman is that indeed it's not a bad movie, and the people who said it's a bad movie don't even think it's a bad movie. But it was a war. It was a war. You know when there's a general election or a presidential campaign, they will try and kind of make the other side look bad, and this is what was happening. If things went differently, Zack Snyder's arc would have been, embraced. He would have got to do both his Justice League movies and maybe even a Man of Steel sequel and a Man of Steel 3. That wasn't going to be allowed, not by Disney. And many bots were out there, many fake comments. That's the real truth. It wasn't the point that The Last Jedi was the film that had bots on it. The Last Jedi is a very boring film, a very boring Star Wars film, and it broke the fandom. And in fact, it had consequences for Solo. So many consequences now that they're not even going to do a Star Wars film a year or the Star Wars stories anymore. Now, obviously, Justice League had a lot of consequences for the DCEU and Warner Brothers. Look at how that's changed. But the DCEU is still going. They're still making those films. That universe with Batman v Superman and Man of Steel still exists. It hasn't been pulled down. They're just expanding it a little bit and doing a black label. Very good ideas. Very good ideas. So from the failure of Justice League and from the reaction, and again, it's very interesting. If Disney were behind what happened with Batman v Superman, and I know in my heart they were, right, and I believe that's the type of company they are, because they were intimidated with what Zack Snyder was doing. Because ultimately, despite the reaction to Batman v Superman, I think ultimately, when his arc of movies finished, they were something that more and more people would have grew to appreciate. And they didn't want that. But, as I say, if Disney are responsible for this, they scored a big own goal. Because then New Line Cinema are coming. And Walter Hamada coming. And now we've got a Joker movie. A Joker movie that is an art house DC movie that's just won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, right? Own goal. It's backfired. So now we have the black label. Now the DC world of movies is going to get bigger than it ever would have been if Disney didn't interfere with Zack Snyder's arc. So when you blame Warner Brothers and you blame them, they just reacted to what happened. They were sabotaged. Yes, sabotaged. They were sabotaged and they were reacting to that sabotage. Kevin Sujihara and Jeff Johns and Zack Snyder were under immense pressure. And when you're under immense pressure, it's like my mum being ill for the past 7 months, where the whole family's turning on each other. So the Warner Brothers family were turning on each other. So instead of blaming them, maybe the narrative should be is on the people who sabotaged us, sabotaged the great franchise Zack Snyder was creating. Because if there was no sabotage, you wouldn't have had a kind of universe without a real leader. Jeff Johns, Zack Snyder, who's in charge? John Berg, who's in charge? Nobody knew. So now we know that we have Walter Hamada, Peter Safran just underneath him. He does all the talking. Walter never talks, he just does the work, which is great. It's a great partnership. So whatever they thought they sabotaged Disney, they've created a bigger problem for themselves.